Hey all, and welcome to lecture number 3. This is about Genesis and creation. Once again, I will be looking at my notes because we're going to cover a fair bit of ground today. So, first off, I want to let you know that I'm gonna introduce you a little bit to Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, the first book of the Bible, the first book of the Torah. Then after that, I'm going to narrow it down. We're going to talk about Genesis 1 through 3 for a while. And then I'm going to explain a little bit about how chapters 1 through 3 can be understood. So let's start with gaining a little bit of an understanding on how Genesis can be divided up. You also have in your course documents folder an outline of the history of Israel, kind of an outline of the whole Old Testament in general, really. And so you should go ahead and get that ready to look at. I think you'll find that helpful. So you'll notice that at the very beginning of this timeline, you have Genesis chapters 1 through 11 listed as universal history or primordial history. This is the part of Genesis that discusses prehistory or the idea of how did things come to be as they are now. You get things like creation, the Tower of Babel when there's languages all divided up, the flood story, Noah's Ark, and a number of other interesting stories that are part of that. It's basically a very brief overview of how things happened that eventually got us to where we are now. Following this, the next division in Genesis is chapters 12 through 25. And in this span of chapters, we get what scholars often call an ancestral cycle. So the ancestors, right? So in this particular passage, these chapters, you have the cycle of Abraham and Sarah and their story. And then after that, chapters 25 through 36, you have the ancestral story of Jacob and his wives, Leah and Rachel and their children. And then finally in Genesis, you have a third ancestral cycle that kind of forms around Joseph, one of the sons of Jacob. So all of these cycles tell the story of patriarchs and also matriarchs and how they contributed to the history of Israel. So one way to think about it is like this. If you were an Israelite living in ancient Israel, you could ask yourself, where did we come from? And the Israelites would refer to these stories, these ancestral stories, to understand the origins of their people and who they are. All right, so let's talk about Genesis overall. So Genesis, as well as the other 4 books in the Torah, or also the Pentateuch, we sometimes call it, that's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So Genesis gets its name from the very first word that's used in Genesis. So if you open the book of Genesis in Hebrew, and I'll just go ahead and do that for you right here. We remember that Hebrew reads from across the page from right to left instead of what you would normally expect from left to right. And you can see actually right here, this word, let me see, I'm doing it backwards like in a mirror, right here. It says Bereshith. And what Bereshith means is beginning. So the Hebrew word Genesis, as you know, means beginning. That's because it comes from the Hebrew Bereshith, which means beginning. It's customary for other books to do this as well. The first word and the first line of the other books in the Torah, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, also use the first word in the book as their title. So in this case, though, in Genesis, we have the very well-known passage of Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. A lot of scholars settle on the fact that this verse acts as a title header that informs the readers tells the reader something important is about to follow. So we can learn a lot from this style. What we really need to understand here is just how to go about reading a book like Genesis, and even really reading the whole of the Old Testament. This opens us up to a bit of a different topic. What you need to know here is that Genesis and most of the Old Testament communicates to its readers by narrative genre. In other words, this text does not talk in the genre of formal theology or philosophy. It doesn't read like a textbook or a philosophy book or anything like that. What you really have is narrative. So the Old Testament communicates by stories and narrative. At first, this may sound like I'm simply saying that the Old Testament is one big story, but that's not true either. It is in a way, but it's not the way we tend to look at it from the Western mindset of where there's a clear division between science and history and story. That's very Western of us to think that way, but that's not how they thought in this ancient Eastern world. So this is how the Old Testament works. What we need to understand is that ancient Near Eastern writing wraps all of these different kinds of genres together in a particular style of narration. So what we need to do as readers of the Old Testament, scholars, y'all are scholars of the Old Testament, is to learn how to analyze better a hidden meaning. Is to not look for or analyze or try and find a hidden meaning in the text. Rather, we need to learn to tune our ears, turn off our Western mindsets, and try and hear what these ancient Near Eastern writers were trying to communicate. So we're not looking to solve mysteries and to think, oh, there's something hidden behind this text. No, we're trying to understand what were these writers trying to say in their own particular way, 3,000 years ago. Let's turn our minds to the creation story for a little bit here. So we've got this creation story that really covers Genesis chapters 1 through 3. It is these three famous or iconic chapters where you get one or even two stories of creation, as well as what we would call the fall, or maybe the corruption narrative with the serpent and Adam and Eve in the garden. Chapter 1 is your more typical creation account where you have the 7 days of creation. Actually, the sixth day, on the seventh day, God rests. Chapters 2 and 3 kind of retell the creation account. If you look at chapter 1, it tends to give the kind of a shell of creation, and chapter 2, it's more like creation is being filled out in the story. So that's one way to look at it and think about it. And so when you read it, you'll see that that's kind of how it works. Chapter 1 especially feels poetic, and it's an interesting and different style of writing. Again, it's not like scientific writing that we would like it to be in the 21st century here. It's not like that, and we need to understand that those original writers were not interested in a lot of the questions that we're interested in today with our scientific minds and our desire to have all of the mysteries and answers of history revealed to us. That's not what they were trying to do with these texts. So something important to understand with that is traditionally we've tended to teach in the church, especially within conservative evangelical churches, that creation happened in a literal 6 days, 6 24-hour days. That may be the case. Certainly, if we believe in God and we believe that God is omnipotent or all-powerful, we certainly believe that God could have chosen to create in 6 literal 24-hour days. But God also may have created in 6 time periods. The word that's used for day, yom, can mean literal 24-hour day, but it also can mean span of time. So, is it possible that God used some evolutionary processes as a part of his creative design? There are many Jewish and many Christian scholars, pastors, teachers that believe that that's absolutely could have been the way that God chose to create. So sometimes we can get wrapped up in this idea that, well, if it didn't happen in 6 literal days, that it couldn't have happened, or that God couldn't have been involved, and that evolution is some godless process. Well, maybe not. And so just understand that what's really important for Christians in this is that God created, and that humans are in some way created in the image of God. And we'll go more into that later. It's also important to understand that these texts were written within their own historical time span within the ancient Near East. So, and there is this kind of a unique genre of this kind of writings in other countries as well. So, so it's important to understand that the Old Testament was not written in a vacuum. It breathed in and breathed out the culture of its own time. So it shouldn't come as any surprise to you that there are other creation accounts written throughout the ancient Near East, and they share some similar motifs with the creation account given in Genesis. For example, one of these common motifs includes the splitting of heaven and earth from each other. Excuse me. So consider the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation story, which has the heavens and earth also split. It even shares the motif of the creation of people out of earthly material like dust or clay. Even the Adam and Eve story has some parallels with other ancient Near Eastern texts. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh loses the fruit of immortality to a serpent, which we also find, obviously, a serpent in the Genesis account, right? So through these parallels, we can learn that the text of Genesis 1 communicated well within its own world, making it accessible to other cultures through its very own genre. And its main goal of Genesis and these creation accounts was communication. The writers were trying to say something about what they believed about God. There are similarities, but there are also some pretty major differences between the Genesis account and the accounts of the other creation stories. So, for instance, in the Genesis account, there's one God who created the heaven and the earth. In the other creation stories, they lived in a polytheistic world where they worshipped many gods, and in their stories, many gods were involved in the creation accounts. In addition to this, the God of the Old Testament always existed. In some of these ancient Near Eastern cultures, gods are being born, gods are being killed, gods are having sex with each other, gods are having sex with people. So there's this huge difference between the Genesis creation account and the understanding of humans within the Genesis account, and creation being good in the Genesis account, whereas in the other accounts, humans are often seen as of no worth or to be used as slaves for the god, things like that. So important to understand. So as we wrap up this lecture on Genesis and creation, I want to offer you a personal take on how to go about understanding this text, and invite you all to explore this as well. It's very difficult to read something like Genesis 1 and 3 and not come away with your own thoughts as to how this works. How do these chapters communicate with the rest of the Bible? And what could they mean for today? Remember, a big question for our class is, why is what I'm reading right now relevant? I prefer to think of this account as being threefold: creation, corruption, and then redemption. So we have corruption, or the fall, that happens through Adam and Eve. And then the rest of the story of the whole of the Old Testament is about God reaching out and desiring to bring forgiveness and healing. All right? We'll come back again for another lecture tomorrow.